फॉग सेंट प्लेन और सिंपल वाइट शर्ट को बना दे स्पेशल और फैशनेबल। फॉग सेंट, न्यू फैशन वेयर फॉर मेन।
Inflation is an issue with many countries, some too low, like Japan, some too high, like India. And you've said before that inflation is actually, central banks are prisoners of their own inflation targeted regime. Is there a sense that they should do away with such targets?
No, I think the targets are useful, certainly for high inflation countries. We understand that once you have that target, then it gives you a certain sense of commitment to bring inflation down. It's been very helpful for India, I think, and the new Monetary Policy Committee is doing a great job in focusing on that. I think for some countries, when it goes too low, there is a problem, which is we don't really know how to bring inflation back up. And that requires dealing with people's expectations in a way that we're still trying to fathom it. Japan is a case in point, with inflation very low for a long time. Of course, the industrial countries have a similar point. Why is it inflation not higher, given the kind of tight labor markets that you have in the US, that you have in Japan, that you're increasingly seeing in Europe? So this is a conundrum. My guess is we will see inflation at some point, probably sooner rather than later, but it is a puzzle.
Normalization is on its way. Do you see risks to the financial system? And are the markets ready to adapt to several major central banks moving at the same time?
Yeah, no, I think that is a risk, because in this period of extreme accommodation, both in terms of the quantity of finance available as well as the price of finance, we've seen a significant buildup in leverage, both explicit as well as implicit. For example, ETFs on their commitment, which Mohammed El-Erian talked about. So these are, I think, concerns, because as that avalanche of liquidity sort of withdraws, and at some point when interest rates move up, people are going to get a little more uncomfortable making the kind of easy loans that they've made so far. And when that stops, when the avalanche stops, then a lot of people who have been reliant on this easy liquidity to fund themselves will have more difficulty. Now, does this happen in a smooth way so that people move down on the leverage spectrum over time? Or does it happen abruptly? That's really the question that we have to wait and see. And of course, as you say, when central banks are moving together to withdraw the quantities, it may happen in a harder way than we think.
Are you concerned that markets are underpricing risks? Because right now we're seeing a lot of euphoria. Yeah. Markets are testing highs after highs after highs, and no bad news is enough to bring it down for some kind of correction.
Right. Well, certainly there's been a fair amount of good news. So there has been the growth across the major countries of the world, which has been helpful. And of course, in the US, there's the tax bill, which brings down corporate taxes. And so there's some euphoria associated with that. But yes, it is a point where one should be concerned. If bad news doesn't affect the markets, that does suggest that perhaps people are thinking less about downside risk. And of course, we are seeing the normalization process. We do see that markets don't fully believe the Fed when it says it's going to raise interest rates, 3 or 4 times over the next year. And so, who's right? That's something that we'll have to wait and see.
I want to touch on India, where bad debt is a huge problem, and a cleanup, you say, is an essential deep surgery. Yeah. Have you been satisfied with the progress made in cleaning up bad debt in the industry?
Well, I think there was a sequence of necessary actions. The first was recognition. The second was to give the banks the tools to work with the corporations in actually resolving the debt. Now, India passed a bankruptcy code recently, and that's being worked out. But I think that's a phenomenally important step in ensuring that there's a full stop at the end of this process. If you don't deal with us, the bankers can go and tell the corporates, then we will have to go to bankruptcy court, and there you may lose your enterprise. I think that's an important message to give, which allows the kind of out-of-court renegotiations that happen all over the world without necessarily invoking bankruptcy. But for that, bankruptcy has to be effective. And we are seeing the first few cases going through the bankruptcy courts. My hope is that as they get resolved in an appropriate way, that will send a signal which will help more rapid cleanup of the banking system.
So some progress, but would you go as far as to say what Moody's suggested, that we'll see the peak of it in 2018?
It's very hard to say. Of course, what this depends upon also is the sequence of events over the course of the year. If growth picks up steadily, then perhaps Moody's is right. But of course, if we have adverse shocks, and India has had a couple over the last year, then there are questions about that statement.
Prime Minister Modi will be coming to or is here in Davos. What do you make of his policy so far? Because you've said before that his demonetization policy is not something you support, and others have called it an epic failure.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that we know enough yet to call it an epic failure, but it did set back growth. And with the goods and services tax coming in soon after, which I think is very necessary for India's longer-term growth, it did create two shocks over the last year. And as the whole world has grown faster, India has been lagging behind in its growth. Respectable, no doubt, very strong growth and very believable growth, but it could grow much faster. Now, it may well be that we have set the stage for stronger growth going forward. But I always say that there are many places we can do better. And if we do that...
Such as?
For example, the power sector. India, for the first time, has enough generation capacity. But our distribution companies aren't able to buy that and sell that to the people. So we don't have 24/7 power in many parts of the country when we could. And power, as you know, is very essential for growth. We've got some major infrastructure projects which, when completed, will change the face of the country. The East-West Corridor, there are a bunch of these projects. But they slowed down by the pace of land acquisition. If we could fix land acquisition, it would create an opening for construction, create many, many jobs. And India needs jobs. So there are things we could do, largely of implementation. India gets strong points for macro stability. I think we need to work harder on the micro implementation.
Just one final question. The budget due out on the 1st of February. What can Modi say to jumpstart the economy?
I think at this point, it's really all the sort of measures that have been announced. It makes sense to see that they're actually working on the ground and that we're taking them forward in an effective way. So implementation, we don't really need a whole lot of new measures, but fixing the projects that are stalled, fixing the power sector, all of these are things that the government has taken up. We need to actually make sure they're effectively done.